When we last spoke about New Genesis, it was in a disastrous state. You can tell I'm not lying because I mentioned this in the thumbnail. You know, cause those never lie. The servers were on fire, the available content was boring and repetitive, the new content was uninteresting and dead after a week, the game was buggy as shit, the community was filled with drama, and grown men were pretending to be women while they flirt with each other. Sega's global support team crawled through user DMs to see if people were talking bad about them. Half of the player base was banned for vague reasons labeled as toxicity, some warranted, most not. The community manager was posting sexual content on the game's official Twitter account, users were getting banned in-game for doing similar things, and monetization was Sega's main focus above all else. On top of that, yes, that's right, there's more, Sega abandoned base PSO2, which could have very well acted as a buffer while New Genesis was getting its bearings. Nowadays, unless you're farming titles or star gems, there's really no reason to play the base game anymore. And Sega knows this, so what did they do with the PlayStation 4 release? They made the base game optional. And this is very unfortunate because base PSO2 is still a lot of fun, and objectively, yes, it's not an opinion here, objectively, the game is better than New Genesis. But because it's in existential maintenance mode, nobody wants to play it. A good portion of the content isn't accessible, some endgame gear can't be acquired, urgent quests aren't scheduled, the ones that do pop up never change, concerts are gone for good, and the economy is beyond fucked, suffering from inflation so bad it makes Venezuela's look like a fucking joke. Post-production Cyber here. As I was working on the video, Sega not only announced that they were bringing back scheduled urgent quests, but also concerts in celebration of the PS4 release. By the time this video comes out, it will be way past that point. But I just wanted to say that I'm glad to see at least one person working to bring life back into the base game. Now if only they were here to stay. Back to the video. And how did I forget to bring up in the last video that the release of New Genesis brought with it an quote-unquote upgrade for the base game's visuals, which messed with the lighting, making it look much worse overall. Jesus Christ. What a fucking mess. As you can clearly see, based on this brilliant and deep observation of mine, both games were, as the experts would say, royally fucked. I genuinely would like to know how and why the game is even alive at this point. With how fucked things were for over a year, it's a miracle that the servers are still up. Truly it is. Things were so bad that for a while, I thought Sega would rebrand the NGS part from New Genesis to Not Gonna Survive. Aside from the improved combat system and character customization, the game had no redeeming qualities to speak of. But I suppose if the game is still around, that must mean someone is stupid enough to pay the bills, and we all know who those people are. It's the fucking whales. No, not the girls in your Discord server. It's the people that spend their entire paycheck on in-game lottery tickets so they can play Barbie and take screenshots with each other. Or maybe you know them better as the lovely people who sit on Reddit and Discord all day arguing with others about how much fun the game is instead of actually playing it. That's right. We've reached the point where people gaslight themselves into thinking they're having fun. I swear, with all the high-level mental gymnastics they perform, they could compete in the Olympics. You know who else can compete in the Olympics? Sega, winning second place in the colossal fuck-up category. Well anyway, we all know the story with New Genesis by now. If for some reason you haven't familiarized yourself with it yet, I highly recommend you watch my first video. If you're one of the lucky few who've already seen it, watch it again. I need ad revenue. That was a joke, of course, but you know what isn't? Giving the game a second chance. Yes, I kid you not, I actually decided to play New Genesis again. It's not something I expected, but neither was Joe Biden winning the 2020 election. So, what compelled me to put up with the game a second time and make this sequel? Well, you're not going to believe me, but I've had several dreams about PSO2 after I quit in October. I took those dreams as a sign of wanting to get back into the game again. So between these recurring dreams of grand space adventure where I sort through my inventory for several hours, and a bunch of fucking nerds on YouTube asking me to post a follow-up, I figured, why the hell not? If anything, now would be a good time to do it. After all, it's been almost a year since the last one came out, and surely by this point things have changed for the better, right? Right? Well, yes and no, and over the course of the video, you will find out why. Before getting into things, I wanted to briefly go over the video's outline and explain why it's so fucking long to begin with. So, first things first, the video will be similar in structure to the last one. I've divided it into several segments, and I've provided timestamps in the description for your convenience, because if I didn't, I wouldn't fucking hear the end of it. The layout of the video is as follows. First, I'll address some criticism regarding the previous video, and then after that, I'll go into the handful of topics that were excluded from it at the last minute. So in a way, this part would be part 2 of the first video. From there, I plan to go through all the updates of New Genesis in chronological order, starting from October, which was when the last video came out. Even though I didn't play during the release of many of these updates, I tried to experience what they left behind in release order to the best of my ability. This part of the video will be a compilation of my thoughts throughout that journey. I plan to cover as much as I can within each update, with the exception of mentioning scratch tickets because I don't care about them in the slightest, and honestly, no one watching the video wants to hear me talk about whether or not I think the dress you like is cute. In most cases, it's not, much like your character. A lot of you are butt-fuck ugly. You seriously need to give yourselves a nose. The nose is what makes your character look good, but I digress. After going through the updates, I'll talk about the direction I think the game's heading in, its future, and of course, let out all the steam I built up in the process. Then I'll wrap everything up with a nice bow on top. As for why I chose to make the video so long, well, I wanted to be thorough and cover as much as possible. Not only because I think it's important from an archiving standpoint, but because many people who are thinking about returning to NGS will likely come across this video. I want them to get an idea of what they can expect should they return. It also acts as a point of reference for when Nerd Slayer wants to make his Death of PSO2 video, and honestly, I wanted to see how long I could push myself before I had a mental breakdown. I put a lot of work into this video, more than I'd like to admit. I don't really like spending a lot of time on something if I don't have to, but I felt that it was necessary in this case. But whatever, it is what it is. So with all that out of the way, grab a drink, some aspirin, maybe a stress ball or two, and most importantly, get comfy, because this is going to be yet another long one.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Most of the feedback I received regarding the last video was very positive. I felt the love coming from you guys, and I'm glad that my message was able to resonate with so many. It's just unfortunate that not everyone agreed with it. In fact, you may be surprised to hear this, but there was actually a decent amount of backlash following the video, and a few things that have happened are kind of serious. Aside from the run-of-the-mill hateful comment and occasional essay about why I'm wrong about everything, some people have tried to impersonate me, dox me, and fabricate images of me saying things that would get me into some serious shit, all because I criticized their favorite game and said that screenshots don't count as content. Anyway, addressing criticism isn't what I normally do on my channel. Typically, whenever I'm faced with it, I just call the people leaving it retarded, because for the most part, they are. This isn't to say I don't read the criticism I receive or take it into consideration, because I do agree that I could have elaborated more on a few things, and that I made some mistakes here and there. It's just that most of the negative feedback I received made absolutely no sense, and as you saw just a moment ago, some of it wasn't even criticism, just real vile shit. When it comes to the actual negative feedback, what I've read sounds like it's coming from people on high doses of copium. Over the past year, a lot was said. Out of all the criticism I came across though, the one comment that left me dumbfounded was from none other than Gemma Taters. If you've played PSO2 at all, you already know who this is, but for those of you that don't, Gemma Taters used to go by the username Anamana. They were one of the most popular PSO2 content creators. I myself used to watch them all the time when I started playing 2 years ago. I felt that they were really level-headed back then, and that they were able to connect with the player base more so than any other PSO2 content creator at the time. So, knowing that they were deeply integrated with the community and always had its best interest in mind, I expected them to get on board with the message behind my video, but much to my surprise, that wasn't the case. I found out that they said my video was dumb because reaction creators are bad for gaming, and that videos like mine bring toxic comments into the community. See, normally I wouldn't take issue with comments like these because they're a dime a dozen, but seeing as the source of them is someone well known in the community, I kind of have to respond. I take issue with their comments for two reasons. One, one, they don't elaborate on what was wrong with the video. No effort was made on their part to explain why they thought it was dumb. They just dismissed it all as reactionary. The second issue I have with the comments is they called me a reaction creator, which to me says they didn't actually watch the video, because I didn't react to anyone else's content. At least that's what I think they're trying to accuse me of, because honestly, I'm not entirely sure what they mean. Because the other way you can look at this is that maybe they think I only made the video to chase a trend, to be overly dramatic to get views, to be reactionary. Well, if you've watched the video, you'd know that both of these aren't true. I clearly proved that I've been playing for a while. I didn't react to someone else's content, and I wasn't really over dramatic in my video. I just explained what happened over the course of a year and expressed my frustration with how Sega was mishandling the game. I didn't make the video because I saw an opportunity to cause chaos. The game was already in a chaotic state. I genuinely care about the game, and the only reason why I spent months working on the video, just like this one, is because the well-known people in the PSO2 community, like Gemma, would tell everyone everything's gonna be okay, content is coming, don't give up hope, Sega knows best, etc, etc, etc. Long story short, I made the video because no one else had the balls to call out Sega on all their bullshit so far, not to bring toxicity into the community. Unlike Gemma, who within the first few seconds of their latest video started obnoxiously making fun of someone else's haircut while wearing a wig.
What the fuck happened to his hair?
Hello everyone. It's
I'm away
9
for a
PM.
few weeks and...
So let's get started with NGS Headline.
What is...
I'm the host of this
What the
program,
fuck happened to
Hero
his hair?
Arrived, the official NGS
What is...
navigator.
What?
Here to bring you the latest info on NGS.
Oh, dude, that does not suit you. Oh, buddy.
Are you excited for
Oh
the
my God.
upcoming region, Kavaris? If you want to strengthen your gear in preparation for the new region, now's your chance.
That is too much.
So much for being against toxicity, the lack of self-awareness is astounding, and this is even more blatant when you realize they made the exact type of dumb content they accused me of making. I don't know where this kind of behavior came from. This isn't something I expected from them out of all people, because they used to be really chill. Now all they do is talk about gender identity politics, their hatred of straight white men, and share unsolicited sexualized selfies on Twitter. No, I wish I was fucking kidding about the last one, but I'm not. This kind of shit is exactly why I call most of the people trying to criticize my work retarded. It's because they do stupid shit like this. Let's talk about the criticism I got from Reddit now, because those accusations are actually more important to address. I made a thread in each of the game's subreddits. Both of them announced that I was working on a sequel video. In the threads, I asked people if there was anything they'd like to see me cover, and as soon as I posted these, things went south. Both of my threads ended up getting locked, and one of them was locked without a reason. The most upvoted comment accused me of defending people that used racial slurs, said that I was spreading lies, and asked me to justify the stream sniping that occurred that triggered last year's ban wave. Another one demanded that I apologize to the community manager because I quote-unquote slandered them and falsely presented them as a 4chan troll. At the time this comment was written, it was the only one on that person's account. Kinda fishy, but whatever. Reddit's fucking wild, man. These people are bipolar. The last 2 threads I made on my previous video were a fucking hit, and the day before my new threads went up, someone else made a post about how shitty the game's been recently, and it gathered over 180 comments, most of which were supportive. So what happened between that thread and mine? Did the Redditors forget to take their medication? Is the dead internet theory right? Are they just bots? Or are they all lemmings that play follow the leader and upvote the first reactionary comment they see? Because I think the last option seems most likely. I fucking hate Reddit so much. Even if you're 100% wrong, as long as you get a lot of upvotes, you're right. Then again, these people did receive Reddit awards. People actually spent money on them, so I guess that means they're right. Maybe the players don't need a sequel video. Maybe I should just end things here so the community can continue to recover from the hour of blatant lies. Oh boy, let me ask you something. Does the game look like it's recovering to you? Seriously, I don't know what the fuck this person is smoking, but whatever it is, I want it. Now, addressing the accusations, no, I did not defend the people who used racial slurs on stream. I said that the players that protested did that because they were rightfully pissed off at the situation, and what they did was not normal behavior. Both of these are facts. I'm not sure how this person even came to this conclusion. It's a straw man argument through and through. It's literal Twitter syndrome. Yeah, I think we're all guilty of straw manning every once in a while, but holy fuck. To come to a conclusion like that, delusional. purely delusional. Now, when it comes to stream sniping, this may be a hot take coming from a content creator myself and as someone who used to stream regularly, but I personally don't give a shit about it. Now, moving on to the other comment, what slander was there? It's been proven that the community manager has posted on 4chan for years and still does. Proving this wasn't something I wanted to spend my time doing, because I don't think a lot of people actually care. That's why I mentioned it briefly in my last video and left it at that. But it's clear now that I should have elaborated on this further, so I guess I'm gonna do that now. If you look through the 4chan archives, you can find tons of posts mentioning for well over a year now how GWiz frequented the threads and even attended several 4chan only in-game meetups. On one occasion, they even went to a meetup hosted by the Trash Board, which was attended by people using porn mods. GWiz knew about this, and when they went to the meetup, they switched their outfit and started posing so the other players can take nude photos of them, because the mods that the people in the thread were using replaced that one outfit with a naked player model. On another occasion, sometime last year, an anonymous user posted about how they were being blocked by someone on Twitter named Maru. Not too long after, someone claiming to be Maru replied with an image showing that they only blocked 3 accounts, 2 of which were used by GWiz. Let's also not forget about how last year, GWiz identified a 4chan user on Facebook and threatened them with legal action after obtaining their personal information. This happened after they found the now known individual in a PSO2 Facebook group that they were later banned from. According to multiple sources, GWiz would join the groups just to cause trouble and then block the group admins so they could avoid them. When it comes to the person they were threatening, the only reason why they were able to do it was because they cross-referenced their Twitter account to make sure it was the right guy, who they first came across on 4chan. The person GWiz was threatening lived in some third world country, by the way. There was absolutely no way GWiz could have ever attempted to even sue this person, but they still implied it could happen, all because the person in question was apparently being transphobic, which is ironic because GWiz actively tries to include themselves in an extremely transphobic community to begin with. You need proof of that too? Well, let's dig through the archives again. We'll find something, more specifically this post here, which contains a screenshot of a YouTube video. The post that it was attached to asks if GWiz is one of us obviously being a regular in the 4chan PSO2 community. The video in question is titled V Singin' Games Escape from the City. Here's a little history lesson for you. 4chan's video game board has a long-running tradition where users will record themselves singing vocal covers of video game music, combine all the submissions into a video, and release it for all to see. It's one of the only group activities the board engages in anymore, because any other attempt to do so is labeled as cringe by election tourists and Zoomers. No fun allowed anymore, but I digress. So what's the deal with this video and GWiz? Well, if it's not obvious by now, this anonymous user is implying that GWiz is and always will be one of them, a 4chan user, because apparently they found that this video from 2009 was on their account. But here's the thing, the author of the post isn't actually anonymous, because if you look at the image closely, you can clearly see 2 buttons under the video titled Analytics and Edit Video. These only show up if you publish the video yourself. If you haven't pieced together the puzzle yet, let me do it for you. Despite GWiz publicly stating that they haven't posted on 4chan since they were a minor, which would be a little over a decade ago, last year, GWiz accidentally exposed themselves as the author behind this post. And of course, other people took notice and quickly pointed it out, and the post was deleted shortly after, just like most of the other ones that mention GWiz. It's kind of strange how that happens. The video game general board is one of the busiest on the entire site. Every thread has serious moderation issues, but somehow, some way, one of the slowest threads seems to have a very dedicated moderator check in on it every few minutes, just to make sure that GWiz's name isn't posted in a negative light. We can speculate as to why many of the posts involving their name get removed, but most people that have experienced this phenomena think GWiz has connections to people on the 4chan moderation team. This is most likely in tinfoil hat territory. There's no proof out there to support this claim, but it wouldn't surprise me if this was the case, since so many posts that mention them get deleted within minutes. I'm not even sure why it happens to begin with, considering GWiz keeps on trying to include themselves in this degenerate community anyway. Oh, and just to make it absolutely clear that this image wasn't photoshopped, let me show you what happens when you put the link it comes with in the Wayback Machine. Before we wrap this section up, I just wanted to bring one more thing to your attention. Did you know that a few days after my first video came out, I was actually browsing the 4chan thread and saw in real time that someone posted a virgin Chad meme comparing myself and G-Wiz? Of course I was the virgin in this case, because who else would I be? Especially after bringing to light all the stuff in the last video. At first I thought this meme was made by G-Wiz. I mean, come on, you'd think so too. Making memes is all they do on the game's official Twitter account. And those pictures of them before they transitioned aren't found online anywhere, and it's not like a random person would have them saved or anything, so logically, anyone would assume they made this image. And I did too. But then I remembered that this meme is kind of funny, so there's no way they could have made it. But then again, right after the image was posted, within minutes, G-Wiz messaged me on Twitter telling me not to worry about it. So I don't know what to believe anymore. This is quite a mystery. But you know what isn't? The fact that G-Wiz still posts on 4chan. So let this be a lesson to you, viewer. The next time you accuse someone of slander, at least make sure you're not wrong before doing so. I hope the Reddit awards were worth it, you fucking retard. As many of you know, my last video was published just 2 days before Sega uploaded arguably their most important one to date. The video I'm referencing is the October headline announcement, where they finally addressed the many important concerns of the community, like, where is the content? God, could you fucking imagine having to actually do that? They announced that video in advance, and honestly, it couldn't have come at a worse time for me. I was already working on mine for several months at that point. The original plan I had was to get it out as soon as possible, but I had one problem. I couldn't stop myself from adding more to the script. Every topic I wrote about jogged my memory about some other bullshit that bugged me. And the same thing happened this time around too. This is normal behavior for someone who really has a lot to say about a flawed game that they enjoy, but people on Twitter would probably classify this as ADHD, like every other normal behavior they experience. To make sure my video had a significant impact, I had to get it out before the headline announcement. To accomplish this, I had to cut out a lot of content from the finished product. Looking back on it, I think it would have been better if I kept this stuff in, but I can't change the past. So, to make up for it, and as a thank you for blowing up my previous video, I will now go over what was dropped at the last second. Some of this may have already been addressed in the previous video, but most of it was in passing. I elaborate on everything in greater detail here, so it's worth sitting through. I'll start by bitching about NGS's gameplay loop. It's very monotonous. If you're not taking selfies, flirting with other grown men in one of the player hubs, or spamming whatever endgame content is available, a typical day in NGS starts with your dailies. These are recurring quests that reset each day. Upon completion, they provide a bit of money, experience, and increase the tier of your mission pass. The tasks you are assigned vary greatly each day. They include exciting things like eating food, gathering food, hunting food, making a floating ball eat food, and killing enemies. After doing your dailies, if you aren't bored to death already, you'll most likely want to train one of your classes. Doing so increases your battle power. Progression in NGS is dictated by this entirely, so it's impossible to ignore. A lot of content is locked behind battle power, so increasing it is a priority. You head to one of the few combat sectors in hope of finding other players to group up with, only to be met with nobody. These are deader than roadkill. Trying to look for other players through the Ryuker device is almost futile, because most often than not, you won't find any rooms with more than 2 or 3 people. So until they added a much needed quality of life update in July, you were flying solo for the most part. So what happens next? You run around a giant circle, heading from one marked location to the next. It may come as a shock to you, but running around isn't the only thing you do in combat sectors. As the name cleverly suggests, you actually go there to engage in combat. Wow. Who would have fucking thought? In combat sectors, you kill enemies until your PSE meter fills up. This meter represents how close you are to frying your graphics card. When you reach the max level, a special event occurs where many enemies continuously spawn around you, blocking your vision and making your platform of choice wish for death. After a few minutes of murdering the locals, a boss monster appears. Like many of the other enemies you encounter in this game, they aren't a challenge and never drop anything worth keeping. After the boss battle is over, the PSE meter resets and you're back to square one. Or, on some rare occasions, in higher ranked zones, you get to do everything I mentioned all over again, filling up your inventory with even more useless shit. Of course, this would only happen if your system didn't crash when the burst happens, which would be a technological feat in and of itself. PSE bursts are the ideal situation to be in when training. They have the potential to give you a significant amount of experience, miseta, and items. Unfortunately, like I said, they only last a few minutes, much like your mother, and the process involved in filling this meter is very boring and seemingly random at times. As for why PSE farming is boring, well, even though you have a handful of photon arts at your disposal to fill it up effectively, all you really need to do is spam the best AoE ability you have, and when the PSE burst happens, you do the same thing. Now, if for some reason you are lucky enough to find other people in the game, unless a PSE burst happens or you're fighting a boss, you most likely won't be able to use any abilities at all. Once your group reaches a certain size, the gameplay loop changes from you being forced to actively engage in combat to you just steamrolling everything in sight without having to do much of anything. And because the game auto-collects the loot that drops, you technically don't have to do anything at all. You don't even need to be near the enemies to get their drops. Auto-looting is actually one of my least favorite additions to NGS. Many people think it's a quality of life upgrade, but I beg to differ. Even with the filters in place, you can't stop it from picking up useless shit. And this is a problem because in NGS your inventory space is limited. Auto-looting makes inventory management a fucking nightmare. Furthermore, it decreases player engagement, which translates to many people not having fun. It also pushes players to purchase the very predatory auto-sell feature, which I'll cover later in the video. Let's go over the trials next. Every so often, one of them will appear at random. These are not optional and must be completed in order to return to the normal gameplay loop. It's said that completing these will fill your PSE meter at a faster rate, but I failed to notice any difference. In some cases, it even lowers it. It's very annoying and it kills all the momentum you've built so far. Now, when you hear the words random and trial, what do you expect? Something special, right? Something different? Well, actually, they're neither. Because the truth is, 9 times out of 10, the trial will have you do the same thing you were already doing, which is kill enemies. And in the off chance you do get one of the more unique trials, you aren't met with much variety. They all involve spaceships of some sort. One has you defend a ship, one has you attack a ship, and the other has you chase a ship. I'm not kidding. And the last one is the only trial in the game at this time of writing that's not combat focused, and it's not very good either. But that shouldn't surprise you. The lack of variety is the main issue I have with the trials. They don't provide the player with a unique experience. Most of them blend in with the normal gameplay loop. These could have been a great way to spice things up, but instead, they throw you into the same situation you've been in plenty of times before. If I'm running around in a circle for several hours, the last thing I want is to be interrupted because I need to kill things over there instead of over here. This happens a lot. The game doesn't even wait for you to finish killing off your current mob before assigning you a trial. They just pop up whenever the fuck they want and demand your attention like some spoiled brat. And unless you schlep yourself over there and take care of it, you can't go back to what you were doing. And it's annoying, especially when you run across the map just to be told you need to go back. This is something that needs to be looked at, because right now, trials are mostly an inconvenience. And as I mentioned, they also need more variety. How about instead of asking the player to kill X amount of enemies, you task them with collecting a number of materials before a timer runs out? This could easily work, but the issue here is that most of the materials found in the overworld aren't in the combat areas. So unless they change the placement of some materials, this kind of trial is out of the question. So what about this then? If the developers want to reuse the ship they love so much, why not have a trial where a player has to recover a piece of a ship that falls off as it flies overhead? You can even integrate this into the lore, having one of the Central City bitches explain that they intend to reverse engineer the technology so it could be used against the dolls. Instead of picking the item up like usual and having it sit in your inventory or floating next to you, the player could carry it in their hands, kind of like how you carry eggs in Monster Hunter, and be forced to run back to an extraction point. Of course, this would mean that the player wouldn't be able to defend themselves, which would put them in a position to rely on other players. See, this kind of trial still uses combat, but gives everyone that's involved a new experience in several ways. One, in NGS, you always have a great amount of control, and putting a limitation on this will breathe fresh air into a very repetitive gameplay loop. It provides an actual challenge. Two, protecting someone as they transport an item gives other players something to defend that isn't just a stationary NPC, like the ship. And three, the trial would utilize more than one location, which many of them don't do. What I just described to you is just one idea I have when it comes to new trial events. Now, I don't know about you, but what I came up with is what I would expect from a random trial, not kill enemies over there instead of over here. I mentioned enemies, so I think now would be a good time to go over their atrocious AI. With the exception of the dolls, most of the enemies are programmed to just pace around like an asshole that was stood up on a date. Their inclusion brings absolutely nothing to the game. They aren't fun to kill, they pose no threat, they drop worthless shit, they're reused everywhere, and some of them look so fucking stupid. Especially this one. This Freddy Freaker looking motherfucker. I hate this thing. I hate this thing so much. Most of the common enemies do not fight back, or rather, can't fight back because they die way too quickly. All it takes to put them 6 feet underground is 2 or 3 hits. The only enemies I've ran into that put up the slightest fight would be those roly-poly ones that require a dive attack, those fat fucks with hemorrhoids, and dolls. Now when it comes to the bigger enemies, they require your attention, but that's only because their primary function is to annoy you. Like the smaller enemies, they don't drop anything worth keeping, and when mobbing, you can skip fighting them entirely. The PSE meter only gets filled after you kill the smaller enemies in each group. Unless the bigger guys are marked in a trial, fighting them is almost always a waste of time. Part of me wonders how different the gameplay would feel if they implemented this the other way around, where you had to kill the bigger guys before moving on. At least if the game had you do that, it would be a bit more engaging. Let's talk about the dolls now. I don't like them. The only ones I've personally enjoyed fighting are Rennis Ratem, Ams Kavaris, and Bujin. Aside from these 3, I personally would not care if the rest of them didn't come back from a vacation to Mexico. The first issue I have with them is they are very boring to fight. Their attacks are predictable and easily countered since they have long wind-up animations. Regardless of what type of doll you fight, the strategy to take them down is always the same. Throw out as much damage as possible to expose their core, and then do it all again, focusing on that. The second issue I have with them is they take way too long to kill. This is not a skill issue. I just feel like the items they drop don't justify the amount of health they have. It's like their only purpose in life is to be an annoying damage sponge. Again, unless prompted, unless required to complete a trial, fighting them is almost always a waste of time. The third issue I have with them is more personal. I don't find their designs visually appealing. In fact, these are probably some of the worst enemy designs I have ever seen. They're alien in nature and look like they were artificially created, but there's no explanation as to why that is. It's been over a year and we still have no clue what they are and why they look like this. All we know is that they're covered in RGB lighting, use water cooling, and are protected by sheet metal. Their color palette is really weird too. Light blue and silver? Those colors don't represent evil. They're typically used for good. I really wish they had more color to them than just blue and silver. I know the other regions have their own variants, but not all the dolls look like this. Some of the boss monsters are still just blue and silver. And when it comes to the snow region specifically, they blend right in with the background in some cases. This is ridiculous. I really wish there were other enemies to fight. If I wanted to fight gaming computers all day, I would start punching the ones I see at Micro Center. And speaking of punching things, let's go over combat. At first I thought I was going to keep my mouth shut on this, and for the most part I will, but there are a few things I'd like to bring up. Even though the combat in NGS feels more fluid than the base game, it feels like it's still restricted in a way. At launch there weren't that many photon arts, and still to this day only a few were added. And most of these can't be strengthened or customized like in base PSO2, despite them each having their own level. When it comes to their usefulness, from what I've experienced, they vary from being downright abusive to completely pointless. Take for instance the Ranger's homing missile attack. This is hands down the only photon art you will ever need to use, unless you're fighting a bigger enemy one-on-one. Now compare this to base PSO2, where the Ranger has several photon arts that can be used effectively against both mobs and bosses, like the Skyfire Salvo, the Satellite Cannon, or the Diffusion Round, which was my personal favorite, which they made into a fucking skill, and I fucking hate it so much. But anyway, to go from that amount of variety to just one mobbing photon art and one bossing photon art is really fucking lame. Something else I wanted to mention was the new dive attack. It adds some variety to the combat, but it still has its own issues. It can be abused so easily that in some cases it outperforms your normal weapon, and there is no cooldown on using it. What's strange about the dive attack is, even though it's a universal combat mechanic, it's only really used against one enemy. It's like they just forgot about it or something. Something else Sega forgot about is how flexible the classes were in the base game. The customization and freedom in NGS pales in comparison to it, even with multi-weapons. Unlike the base game, most of the skills in each class can only be used if that class is set as your main one. I'm not sure why they chose to put restrictions like these in place. It doesn't benefit the game or the player in any way. Giving people the option to experiment with wild and crazy builds would make things more interesting and fun. Not only that, but it would create new strategies as well. For example, being able to use Warcry as a ranger could help you reposition an enemy so you can apply a weak bullet in the right spot instead of hitting their shoulder or something. And letting someone use the gunner's PP recovery skill would result in their DPS increasing tremendously. These are just two examples I came up with, and there are tons more. Can you imagine how flexible and deep the class customization would be if they didn't restrict the skills like this? Last but not least, just attacks are gone. Some people say this was a pointless mechanic, but I respectfully disagree. That little rhythm-based minigame kept the player engaged just enough to make sure they didn't go on autopilot. It benefited those who were able to master the timing of their attacks and abilities, and most importantly, it kept the base game's combat from feeling stale. Even though this wasn't added to NGS, I still find myself timing the attacks as if the system was still in place. It just feels natural to me to time my attacks instead of holding down the attack button like some fucking barbarian. It feels more satisfying too. I think before moving on, we should talk about one more thing. Battle power. I'm fine with it being a representation of your overall strength, but what I don't like is how it's used to lock players out of content. When I started playing NGS again, I wasn't even able to participate in any of the newer urgent quests or even progress through the story because I first had to reach this irrelevant threshold. I remember hating this when the game came out as well. I want to make it very clear. I'm not against quests and other content having prerequisites. What I am against is forcing the player to meet these prerequisites when the battle power system is built upon several other obtuse mechanics. Prerequisites in NGS are different than, say, RuneScape, because in RuneScape, it's clearly explained to you how to meet those requirements. Get 40 fishing, clear this quest, obtain this item, etc., etc. In NGS, it's very vague. All you're told is to reach this number, and there are several ways to do it, but none of them are explained very well. And unless you know the formula involved with battle power, trying to meet this number is all guesswork. The battle power system is dictated by three things: your class level, how many skills you've acquired, and your equipment. Class level is self-explanatory, and I won't go over it. Just know that unlike any other RPG, increasing your level doesn't strengthen you as much as you think it would. In fact, leveling up is, in my experience, the slowest and worst way to increase your battle power. The skills you learn are acquired through skill points, which are received after completing shrines. Sorry, cocoons. I know I went over cocoons in the previous video, but why? Why do cocoons give skill points? I still have no idea why they chose to distribute them this way. It's so unorthodox. It's the complete opposite of every RPG and even the base game. Cocoons don't test your skill at all. Most of them are over in minutes, and a good portion of them don't even include combat. A chunk of them are just parkour. It's just so weird. Like, instead of asking the player to grind out their classes like in every other MMO, which has been proven to work, Sega just said, fuck it, we need to copy Breath of the Wild some more, because obviously that's a good idea, and ask players to jump around some bombs and run through a maze so they can further strengthen their character. Like, what? When am I ever going to have to do any of this again outside of a cocoon? Am I a fucking ARX member or Solid Snake doing VR missions? This can't possibly be VR training, because VR training would imply you're improving your skills. You aren't doing jack shit here. You're just killing the same monsters you see outside. And it's not like this is any different from combat zones either, considering you're usually the only person running around in them to begin with. I'm sorry, I just really don't like these. I hate having to find them all in the new regions. I hate having to go through each and every one of them just to increase my battle power ever so slightly. With equipment, you raise your battle power by repeating the endless cycle of upgrading it for negligible stat buffs. You grind or buy the strongest augments, spend money affixing them, and depending on which augment it is, risk losing it unless you have an item that stops that from happening. Then you waste even more money grinding the equipment to a higher level, further unlocking more augment slots, which will then be filled with more expensive augments that may or may not be added depending on whether or not you have an item to stop that from happening. And then after that, you spend even more money on materials unlocking potentials. And I didn't even mention fixes yet, but fuck that, we're done here. All of this just to increase your battle power by a small margin. And you need to do this for 4 items, a weapon, and 3 pieces of armor. And the worst part is, after doing all that, just to gain access to the story or some other activity that will be over in 10 minutes, what you have will most likely be outclassed by the new equipment you get later. Did I also forget to mention that as of this writing, the augments don't transfer over to new weapons, so if you waste thousands upon thousands of Meseta trying to buff your current weapon, you can't move those rare and expensive augments to a newer one, which means if you're into maximizing your damage, every few months when a stronger weapon comes out, you're forced to do this upgrading process over again. And sometimes when you reach new regions, you're given good equipment for free, like in Retem, when you're given Evolcoat weapons that are almost maxed out at plus 40. Before getting this, I spent a few hours grinding my weapon just to get into Retem, and as soon as I get there, I'm given an even stronger weapon for free? Fuck you. What it all boils down to is, the game has you waste time augmenting your equipment to keep you invested, to make you think there's content. The amount of time it takes to fully upgrade all your equipment is insane, and it's deliberately done this way so the game can artificially extend your playtime, which in turn is supposed to get you more invested in your account because logically, the more time you spend with something, the more you grow attached to it. That's how the sunk cost fallacy works, and besides that, brain like when number go up, so of course people are going to augment their weapons. Now, don't get me wrong, this process of affixing and grinding weapons was a staple in base PSO2, but the activity was never forced upon a player to progress through the game's story or access new content. You did it just to get more damage or reap some other benefit. Also, if you applied augments to your weaker weapons, you could still transfer them over to stronger ones, and the ability to do this at all made a lot of items very valuable, which in turn made players a lot of money. But that's besides the point. What I'm trying to say is, I just think it's funny how they decided to let Battle Power lock you out from so much when there's barely any content to begin with. Base PSO2 never kept players away from its content. It gave them plenty of opportunities to participate through lower difficulty options. In NGS, the game just tells you to fuck off until you're ready. I mean, look at this shit. I'm a few points under the requirement. I would easily be able to take on the enemies in this quest, but because I'm only a few points off, I can't do it. Now imagine a normal player with very little experience spending all their money on augments, tricking out all their gear, and then finding out they still didn't do enough, and there's no way for them to know how to increase it further. They'd fucking quit, and honestly, I'd do it too. This is unnecessary. Now this may come as a surprise to you, but this video isn't all doom and gloom. Objectively, the game has more content. The servers finally work, the developers have been slowly adding back missing features, and they've been listening to player feedback from both regions. They even pushed aside working on newer classes for a while because the game was lacking playable content. The community, while still very small, is tight-knit and very supportive of one another. There hasn't been a huge ban wave recently, and from what I've seen, the support team has been a bit more transparent when it comes to banning players. And of course, there are still scratch tickets, they never stop shitting those out, but the rate at which they come out seems to have dwindled a bit. So what does this all mean? It means Sega finally has a game that may be worth playing. There's no doubt about it. NGS is in a better state than how it was in the previous video. That being said, whether you consider the new content new is up for debate, since most of it, aside from the overworld, is made with reused assets. And that's one reason why I had a lot of trouble putting together this video. I've recorded hours upon hours of footage, but because everything looks so goddamn similar, I couldn't distinguish one clip from the next. This is one of the game's biggest issues that I'll elaborate more on later. When it comes to the servers, they're stable now, but that's only because barely anyone plays anymore. The player count on Steam still sits around 3,000 on average, and while the Steam charts aren't the end-all be-all of how healthy a game is, because NGS is playable through several PC launchers and consoles now, from what I've been told by people in the industry who have worked on multi-platform games, the Steam charts are a pretty good indicator of how the game's performing. Many features are still missing that were in base PSO2, like personal rooms and alliance quarters, and even though the devs do take feedback into account, most of what they listen to is cherry-picked from their Discord server and Twitter. They also cherry-pick the feedback they respond to during the headline announcements. For example, while they did announce their fight against toxicity, they'd never address why so many people were permanently banned over their first non-severe offense. But they will go over something barely anyone noticed, and then proudly pat themselves on the back, letting us know they have a fix for it. The community is still filled with drama despite it being smaller than ever, and players are still banned for bullshit reasons, like selling an item to another player. You heard me right, you can be banned for selling items. How does this work? Well, if you list something on the player shop and the person who buys your item previously engaged in real-world trading, you are now potentially in the possession of dirty money without even knowing it. And because you now have dirty money associated with your account, it's at risk of being banned. And there's no way to tell if this happened to you until it's too late. Guilty by association, even if you weren't aware of the crime. As for the scratch tickets, well, they come out at a slower rate, but they still mostly contain Coomer gear for women. Sorry, I mean Type 2s. This means that someone playing as a Type 1 or a cast, for the most part, waits around like a moron for new fashion items while the rest of the player base runs around with their 4th set of breast implants, which were ported from the base game, like many other quote-unquote new scratch ticket items. Kind of off topic, but doesn't anyone find it strange how in NGS the concept of male and female doesn't exist, but for some reason the game won't let you see Type 2's nipples? Anyway, when it comes to releasing content, Sega still has the mindset of drip feeding it. This may have been an acceptable practice back in 2012, but it isn't in 2022. They know how MMOs operate. This is unacceptable at this point, especially when there are plenty of other MMOs and live service games that provide great updates on a rather short and consistent basis. Sega doesn't drip feed content because they lack the manpower or resources. They drip feed content because that's what they've done with PSO ever since its inception. The drip feeding is and always will be intentional, and they get away with it not only because it's been the norm for so long, but because the whales keep on buying scratch tickets and premium. And this, at some point, may be their downfall, because sooner or later, the whales are going to get tired of taking screenshots in the same 3 or 4 settings. And once that happens, they'll stop buying scratch tickets, and probably move to another game where they do the same thing, only in that game, there will actually be other things to do. Sega needs to put a lot of work into repairing the damage they've done to both the Phantasy Star IP and the company's reputation. And to do this, they need to focus on putting out unique, meaningful content. Keyword meaningful, on a consistent basis. There's no other option at this point. And until they figure this out, the game will never reach its full potential. It'll just be a screenshot studio with tacked on combat and gacha systems. I went off on a little tangent there. This section is supposed to be about NGS 1 year later, not about what needs to be done to fix it. So let's get into what you came here for, starting with what happened as soon as I logged in. Well, as you would expect, I realized the game still runs like shit. Even if it's installed on an SSD, it freezes every time you boot it up. It also stutters in the overworld every chance it gets whenever it loads a new region. And another thing, I'm not sure if it's just me, but I've been having a lot of trouble trying to get into the base game. It's like every other time I try to relive the glory days, the game shits itself and crashes. And if it doesn't do that, it lags like a motherfucker until I load NGS and then go back to the base game. But anyway, after the game decided to unfuck itself and finished rendering everyone else's breast implants, I was bombarded with star gems. I think these are from all the titles I retroactively obtained. A notification popped up letting me know I acquired them, but I refused to clear it because that would mean having to click on every single title. So instead of wasting my time doing that, I decided to check out my storage. Big mistake. I forgot how to navigate it. After a while I got the hang of it, but geez Louise, I can't imagine what it's like being a new player. Having 1,000 different storage boxes, some not being usable unless you spend real money, some being purchased with in-game currency, some only accepting one type of item. It's insane how they expected anyone to follow all of this, but we did it somehow. Maybe it's because we're all secretly masochists or something. I ran around trying to get back in the swing of things and at some point began going through the content, starting with the October update, which introduced a bouncer class, a new quest type, additional waves to the mining rig, a series of 4-star fire elemental weapons that came with the Halloween event, and the return of mag form changing. The first order of business I had was to try out the bouncer. The bouncer uses the soaring blades and the jet boots. Of the two, I personally prefer the blades, but only because in my experience, it's easier to mob with them. They also have a long-range attack. Being the ranger shitter I am, I enjoy annoying everyone from a distance, kind of like what I'm doing now on YouTube. The jet boots were alright, but they had some elemental effects that I didn't want to bother experimenting with. I didn't feel like wasting my precious skill points. You have to remember, I only had like 20 at the time, so I couldn't experience the class to its fullest. But that's okay, because I don't really like the jet boots anyway, and I don't see myself really using it in the future. Both of the playstyles were very flashy, and this is something that bothered me, so much so that I actually used the stealth camo on both of the weapon types. Even after hiding them and turning down the visuals in the options menu, the particle effects were still a bit too much. Visual clutter is one of the reasons why I actually prefer playing the Ranger over everyone else. Sure, the Ranger produces particle effects, but they aren't jumbled on top of an enemy at close range when doing so. The new quest type that was introduced was Battle Dia, or the Battle Dia? I don't know. It was the first of several additions to the game that finally introduced replayable content. These quests come in two flavors, Piss and Grape. Piss involves regular monsters while Grape lets you fight Gigantics. To access either quest, you must find their associated terminal. They aren't mentioned anywhere in the game aside from some pop-ups, and they require you to manually track them down yourself. They don't show up in the map until you find them. Both quests can be played with up to 3 other people, and if you're in a group, only the party leader needs to fulfill the starting requirement, which is using 5 consumable triggers. These triggers can be acquired through several ways, but the most common and reliable method to obtain them is by killing monsters, or so the wiki says. I've spent several hours trying to get some yellow ones, only to receive not one fucking trigger. There's good news though, at some point, I did manage to get 3, but that was only after a new enemy type triggered a PSE burst. I don't know why this one in particular dropped them, but whatever, 3 is better than nothing. Still, spending an hour just to get 3 triggers? How can anyone justify this? The good thing about these triggers though is that you can sell them to other players, so not wanting to torture myself any further, I opened up the player shop, searched for the trigger, and... Are you fucking kidding me? 5,000 Meseta each for something that rarely drops?! So I bought 2, redeemed my triggers, and nothing. I've waited more than 5 minutes and no one joined. Now, it may be obvious to you that no one really plays the lower level Alio Battle Dia, but at the time, this is all I had access to. I'm experiencing the content released in chronological order. I'm not high enough level to even get to the rank 2s yet. Anyway, I decided enough was enough. I blew through the quest by myself, and honestly, I don't think it was worth it. I'm told they give really good experience, but I can't stomach cocoons anymore, so I think I'm just gonna stick to training in the overworld. And speaking of the overworld, that's where the mining rig is found. As I mentioned before, the urgent quest received additional waves. No one cares. I can't talk much about the Halloween event because if it wasn't obvious by now, I wasn't there for it. Not that it matters, I didn't really miss much. It was the same shit as every other event so far. Crawford hangs up some lights in Central City, some limited time missions are added, you kill enemies with seasonal icons stapled to their forehead, and redeem event points for some pointless stickers and weapons that will be outclassed in a few weeks. Last but not least, Sega added a way to change your mag's appearance. Like most other players up until this point, I had the mag disabled because they were boring and just added to the game's overall visual clutter. Nowadays though, I have it enabled, but only because I have the Lady Sukuna Hime Fumo following me everywhere. If I didn't have this, I wouldn't be using the mag at all. November's update wasn't much, but it was surprising nonetheless. Sega actually brought the Attack on Titan collab over to the global region, and this was for base PSO2. They even updated the base game's lobby to match. I logged in for a few minutes when this was released just to check it out, but there wasn't much to do. It was a glorified scratch ticket event. Come December, Sega released the game's biggest update yet, a brand new region. Along with it, the continuation of the game's pitiful story, a level cap increase, new class skills, stronger equipment, the return of more base game features, and a new mag function. And of course, being December and all, they came out with the limited time Christmas event, which is perfectly encapsulated by Retem's desert theme. Let's talk about Retem now. The region itself is gorgeous. Despite it mostly being a barren wasteland devoid of human life, there's a lot to see here. And it's not just sand, there are rocks, and oversized mushroom-shaped rocks. And there are dried up valleys and sandstorms too, and there's even an oasis, so Retem brings a little something for every Chad nature lover to enjoy. Comparing it to Alio, Retem is miles ahead on every front. Retem's terrain work is fantastic. The sand dunes and rock formations feel natural. They don't give off the impression that the person in charge of building the world randomly placed objects here and there like in many other open world games. Props feel like they have meaning. Every rock, every plant, every animal in Retem helps build this believable locale. When it comes to the skybox, it's goddamn gorgeous. Just look at this. I mean, come on, how could you not find this pretty? You'd have to be a bigger contrarian than me to think otherwise. Don't even get me started on the lighting. It adds so much to the atmosphere regardless of the time of day. The sunset, gorgeous. Look, even the moon has dynamic lighting effects and produces shadows. How many games do you know of that do that? Well, maybe you know a few. I don't really play many modern games, so this really impressed me. Overall, the region is very attractive, but I wouldn't have sex with it, because then I would get sand down my pants. But that's besides the point. One thing that bothers me about Retem is the city. You may be thinking, what in the fuck can be wrong with Retem City? Well, hear me out. First of all, it's not a city. Neither is Central City, but at least it makes an effort to try and pass as one. Retem City, on the other hand, makes Skyrim's cities look impressive. This city, or as I like to call it, shitty, is just a bunch of booths inside of a large metal, whatever it is, a cover? Is it an engine of a ship that crash landed years ago and ended up buried in the sand? I don't think there's an explanation for it, or why Retem City is here to begin with. There's no houses, just some booths, no nearby source of water like a well or something, which you would kind of expect, being in the middle of a desert, and a large portion of this very limited, precious space is reserved for concerts. Not a medical bay, that's in a fucking tent. It's used for concerts. Look, I get it, the concert is integral to the story and the future content, but how can Sega expect anyone to believe that Retem was once a bustling city if a concert stage takes up more than half of its real estate? Well, I mentioned concerts, so I guess now would be a good time to praise the sound direction for Retem, and more importantly, how great the music is. While the overworld and boss battles still include dubstep, it doesn't overpower the more noticeable Middle Eastern influence in the music. And I'm fine with that because I happen to like that kind of music to begin with. Just like the visuals, the music in Retem is miles ahead of Alios, especially the city's theme, which is playing in the background right now. What's even cooler is that when you clear the story, a more lively jazz rendition of the city theme is played. It even has a day and night version. The theme fits very well for the story's conclusion, encapsulating the hope and triumph achieved by the crew, and not to mention how much busier the city will be with the main threat gone. The city music is honestly some of the best that the game has to offer, and reminds me of the music that would sometimes play in the base game's lobby. So this music is kind of nostalgic in a way, even if I only played the base game 2 years ago. When it comes to Retem's story, I wasn't too fond of it. I'll get to why that is, but let's recap what happens so we're all on the same page here. I'm gonna avoid spoilers as much as I can. The story's second chapter starts with Crawford, that definitely not secretly evil man back in Central City, asking for your assistance with building Central City's giant cannon. He says that the city doesn't have the necessary materials to improve it, and that they are found deep in the neighboring Retem region. Your task is to befriend the Neanderthals that live there, whoa Crawford, don't have to be so racist, and help them deal with their dolls problem. And ultimately come back with the materials, because that's all Crawford really cares about. You make your way there and find that the city is under siege by some giant snake-like monster, Rennis Retem. You meet the leader of the city, Nadara, and ask for her help with Crawford's plan. She refuses, as they cannot spare any personnel or resources with that giant metal lizard continuously wrecking their shit. So obviously, this sets up the main quest line, which is to defeat Rennis Retem and in exchange, get a blowjob. Receive the materials needed for the cannon. Along the way, you help Nadara overcome some personal issues, watch Manon do a bunch of nerd shit, and receive second-degree burns from standing around in the desert all day. Excluding the one quest that made my computer blue screen twice, overall the story quests were serviceable. Just like the chicken I ate at Popeyes last week. It wasn't very good, but at least it tasted like chicken. The macaroni and cheese, on the other hand, that shit tasted like it had hair in it. It was disgusting. But anyway, the highlight of all of this was definitely the battle leading up to the finale. While I would like to go over why that is, I did say I was keeping this video spoiler free. Everything else though, I don't know. It kind of felt rushed and disjointed at times. The cliffhanger before the big reveal was also a little unnecessary. The plot twist that followed, while half unexpected, left me indifferent. It didn't impact me the way Sega wanted it to, and that's because for the most part, I didn't care about the characters. The 3 cast bodyguards were kind of cool, but Nadara sounds like she's trying too hard to be just that. Like the story she's a part of, Nadara is an incredibly boring character. Her main issue is that, unlike her ancestors, she can't use the power of song to help her friends in need. Even though she's been fighting this internal struggle of hers for most of her life, we can't sympathize with her because the game barely gives us a chance to know her, and this isn't helped by the fact that most of the character development that occurs happens through other people talking, which is ironic because she's all about growing on her own accord. I realized this during the big reveal following the cliffhanger. Nadara isn't even the one who explains what happens. It was fucking Manon, which becomes a very annoying recurring theme. Her voice acting is also atrocious. It sounds like it was phoned in, and it's much quieter than the others. I guess phoning in for the role would make sense since we were in a pandemic after all, but still, it's jarring to hear such inconsistent quality in the voice acting. It kinda sounds like she was wearing a mask when recording. My biggest complaint is that she speaks with these awkward pauses in between every other word. And something else that annoys me is how the characters pronounce Ritem. Yes, this is cherry picking, but it's my video and I can do whatever the fuck I want with it. In the same scene, you'll have two characters pronounce Ritem differently. What's even weirder is that this happens with someone that has said the name properly before. It's one thing if this occurs with two people that live in different parts of the world, but in the same place? That's just strange. You don't hear some people that live in Ohio call it Ohio. Here, just listen to this.
Wait! Don't shoot! I'm not your enemy. I'm Hadi, an ARCS defender from Ritem City. There is a repository in the Redham region that is under our jurisdiction.
This just really fucking bugs me. Some other things added with Ritem obviously include new enemies, cocoons, and quests. The mobs you find around the map follow the same structure as those in Alio. They consist of a bunch of enemies local to the region and a doll or two. Unfortunately, despite being low in number, the dolls still take precedence here. And this sucks, because the last thing I wanted to do after almost a year was fight more of them in Ritem. The local enemies have a good amount of variety, consisting of both organic and artificial life. It's the perfect set of characters for a nature versus machine sort of theme, but instead of doing something different, like making the main storyline revolve around helping Nadara save the local wildlife from the automata, they chose to sideline this possibility for dealing with the fucking dolls, which by the way, are for the most part the same ones you encounter in Alio, just with slightly different appearances and attacks. Remember that fat fuck with hemorrhoids? In Ritem, he's there, he's just smaller and larger, and that's it. That's basically the extent of variety when it comes to the dolls. And this lack of variety in the main enemy type is one reason why so many people say there's no content. Because regardless of where you are, it still feels like you're fighting enemies in Alio. This is one of the game's biggest pitfalls, and it's something that needs to be addressed with the 4th region, or else I can't see this game lasting any longer. Now, this issue isn't as bad when it comes to the boss monsters. Yes, they do reuse those too, but at the very least, a good amount of them are exclusive to Ritem. I won't lie, this is kind of disappointing, but the newer bosses stand out enough to provide a much needed new experience. The quests, as you would expect, are like Alio's, except they take place exclusively in the Ritem region. Not much has changed otherwise. The cocoons, on the other hand, are more varied. They focus on more than just combat this time. I like that there's finally something else to do in the cocoons, but the issue is, I still don't like them. I don't like the concept of them. They're filled with reused assets and contribute greatly to why so many people say there's nothing to do. The new urgent quests were pretty cool. One of them involves fighting a variant of a boss from Alio, but surprisingly, this one is memorable. The environment actually plays a huge role in why I feel this way. The narrow and vertical stage provides a fight that we've never had before. Most of the boss's attacks are related to sound. It uses its weapon like a guitar to generate shockwaves. This is really fucking cool, and it's actually very fitting for a region that focuses on the power of song. I wish the other boss fight implemented music-related gimmicks as well, or maybe it does and I'm just not remembering it. Either way, I like the Dustelvera fight, but not as much as the Rennis Ritem one. The new equipment introduced with Ritem includes the 5-star Fivla, Gothica, and Quintel weapons. The Gigantix enemies drop new weapons too from the Griaga series. There's also an even rarer series of weapons called Relics, which have their own share of controversy, but I'm not familiar with what that is, so I won't go into detail about it. All I know is that they're hard to get, and I still haven't gotten one. As for the classes, their level caps were increased to 35, and each one received a new skill. Additionally, the technique-based classes received their missing elemental attacks as well. Player titles finally made a return, which are not only a great source of free star gems, but a way to show off how much time you've wasted in the game. The lookbook was added as well, much to the delight of narcissists everywhere. And as for the mag, it received a much needed quality of life upgrade. It now gives you the ability to specify which items you wanted to search for. If you already know where most of the materials are in the overworld, this feature is kind of pointless. But for someone like me that doesn't bother remembering trivial shit, it does make my life easier. It also makes it easier to hunt for red boxes. So if you're missing a lot of them like I am, you now have an easier way to find them. Christmas time is here again, except it's not really here again. It's actually the first time in NGS that Christmas has, whatever, segue ruined. I wasn't there for it. I may have missed my presents from Santa, but then again, he didn't really leave much for us to begin with. Like any other holiday event, Central City hung up some lights, you were asked to find some transparent symbols hidden throughout the city, and I think that's it. As far as I can tell, the Christmas event didn't ask people to run around and kill enemies with Christmas trees glued to their forehead. A little shocking, but whatever. Either way, it seemed uneventful. And that wraps up December. Overall, the Retem update was more or less positively received. A survey that came out following the release showcased that things were on the upturn, but there was still a lot more that needed to be done. For the game's first massive update, I think it did its job. And honestly, I think at this point, most of the players that did stick around just wanted something else to do. New year, new Genesis. That was funnier in my head. I wonder how Sega will start the new year. Will they give players a new quest? A minigame? Maybe release another much requested feature, like player housing? Oh wait, no, it's just a limited time event. Again, actually, 2 of them. One for the new year, and one for the winter festival. Do I really need to go over how these played out? You already know about the seasonal enemies having PNGs glued to their forehead, and you can already guess that another series of 5-star elemental weapons was released, which will soon be outclassed. So is there really a need to elaborate on this any further? We need to move on. There's a lot more shit to cover. Fortunately, February was a bit more lively. The level cap was raised to 40, a new urgent quest was added, older combat areas received higher ranked zones, giving players a reason to visit them again, and existing quests were given a similar treatment, providing players with higher difficulty settings. On top of that, Nadara's character was fleshed out a bit more with the addition of a new side story, and finally, after patiently waiting, Sega added a concert. It's okay. Nadara's voice actor is terrible when playing the role, but she does a pretty good job singing, and I guess that's all that really matters. It's no Arcs Festival, but then again, nothing is. Nothing can top Koi Koi. Some quality of life adjustments were made, and new features were added as well. The mag now lets you play music from music discs. Battle Dia quests could be started from anywhere instead of having to physically be at their terminal, and most importantly, finally, party bonuses were added. How Sega managed to get this far into the game's development without adding party bonuses is beyond me. Did they forget that it was a core feature in base PSO2? It's the only reason why people would party up to begin with, and they know this. So how the fuck did it take over a year for them to add it? I'm sorry. I was just really shocked to hear that party bonuses weren't a thing until February. I thought this was already in the game. And now that I look back on my experience with NGS during the early days, I realized that just like in real life, nobody invited me to parties. And now I see why. It's not because I'm a buzzkill, it's because Sega is retarded. Something else that proves Sega is retarded is the fact that they included new content in an older region instead of utilizing their brand new one. Look, I get it. They want to get the most out of their work, and MMOs are always plagued with the issue of dead areas. But in February, the game was not in a state where it could already be reusing assets. Retem just came out in December, and now they're already asking people to go back to Alio when they were running around in it for almost a year? I mean, what the fuck? Did they really think this was a good idea? And it's not like you had a choice either. If you wanted endgame upgrading materials, you had to go back to Alio. It's one thing to send players back there for new content, but the thing is, aside from the urgent quest, there was no new content. The Megalodics type enemies don't count. They're literally the same thing with a different overlay. In fact, if I didn't read up on this month's update, I wouldn't have even known they existed. I still don't know if I even encountered one. But at least this update introduced one new enemy, the urgent quest monster, Dark Falls. You know, the big bad that fucked up the tutorial area and then dipped forever? Yeah, him, her, it, whatever. It's weird how Dark Falls just shows up without any prior warning. I mean, yeah, we're building the cannon to help fight it eventually, but there's no explanation as to why it pops up this early on to fight us. I would have expected the Dark Falls fight much later, maybe after completing the cannon, not halfway through. The fight itself is very reminiscent of base PSO2, and it's actually what I prefer when it comes to urgent quests. A special, instanced area that isn't part of the overworld, a tough battle filled with more than 3 attacks, a powered-up form that actually changes the boss's physical appearance instead of just turning them red, and music that isn't dubstep. This is peak NGS in my opinion, and this is what the game needs more of, more base PSO2 influence. I really enjoyed this fight. I just wish everything wasn't fucking blue though. Moving on to the March update, it was like January's. I'm not talking about it, but I do have to talk about April. In addition to increasing the level cap to 45, new photon arts were added for each class. Finally, Sega also added more 5-star weapons, this time using a Dolls theme. Yup, I'm never using these. PSE Burst Encores were enabled in Rank 3 combat sectors, filling your inventory with more useless shit even faster, and they bumped up the level of Gigantics enemies as well, to give the few people that don't AFK something else to do. The quality of life features that came with this update include a photo room, because apparently screenshots are that important, and a playlist function for your mag, so you can listen to more than one song on repeat. And it even lets you customize when each track starts and ends. This is really cool, but did anyone ask for this? A deep and customizable playlist feature like this just seems like it's kind of pointless to have when most people have a streaming service or YouTube playing in the background. It just feels like the resources that went into this could have been put towards something else. I honestly don't see many people using this. What will see a lot of use though is the newly added streamer mode, or as I like to call it, the anti-cringe mode. This disables the in-game chat so role-playing degenerates, redditors, and other undesirables can't fill your screen with cringy bullshit and the N-word. Even though I don't stream PSO2 myself, or rather, dare not to, because the last time I tried, my graphics card exploded, I think I might start using it. I'm just getting really sick and tired of seeing self-inserted original characters screaming Romanized Japanese while cutting into the screen every 30 seconds. It's so fucking annoying and very cringe. Before moving into May, I know I'm supposed to talk about the Geometric Labyrinth, but I'm gonna be real with you. I didn't complete it, so I have nothing to say about it. I know you're supposed to be able to play this with other people, but I still haven't been able to find anyone to do this with. And I don't want to give my input on something that I never actually got to experience. But honestly, I don't think I'm missing out on a lot, because to me, it just looks like a really, really long cocoon. Alright, so we're in May. It's the 1-year anniversary of NGS. What do you think happened? Did you guess nothing? Well, if you did, you're right. This event was much like the others. Limited time client orders, a limited set of elemental weapons, a limited time hide and seek game, and a limited time player base that's just fucking leaving. Oh, and Crawford sent out people to decorate a bit more than Central City this time, but I doubt the player base even noticed that the trees in the region mags looked any different. I don't even know why they bother decorating these. You literally spend 30 seconds interacting with them each day at best. Aside from the lackluster anniversary event, near the end of the month, Sega added a mining request to Retem, but honestly, no one gives a shit about that. Now, I know I said I didn't want to cover limited time events that reuse assets, but I had to, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to bring up these cute Fumos. I just love these things, especially the Manon one, because it doesn't talk. You know, I think everyone was expecting Sega to do something more for their first anniversary update, but nah. Who fucking cares about that? That's stupid. No one gives a shit about the 1-year anniversary. It's nothing special. But you know what is? Next month's update. In June, Sega finally released the ever-awaited Kavaris region. Or Kavaris region. However you want to pronounce it, it doesn't matter. The game's characters don't care how their regions are pronounced, so you shouldn't care either. Like the Retem or the Redem update back in December, this one was a complete package. Continuing the story, adding new side quests, introducing new equipment, yada yada yada. This was NGS's biggest update yet, and it came at the perfect time, because despite all they added, there was still a severe content drought. So needless to say, its addition brought back a decent number of people willing to give the game a second try, which included myself. So anyway, how is Kavaris? The region itself, like Retem, is a welcome change from Aleo. It's beautiful. Even on lower settings, I found that Aleo and Retem can do little to match its atmosphere. Sega's environmental art direction, as usual, is top-notch all around. From the snow and ice-covered mountains and the crystalline caves to the hot springs filled with men pretending to be women, the level designers expertly crafted what a frostbitten mountain range would look like. There are so many little details you'd miss unless you stop to smell the yellow snow-covered roses, like the native wildlife huddling together for warmth, and the random campsites spread through the foothills of the mountain, showing that the area is treacherous and that very few dare to venture into the frosty wonderland. And then we have the skybox. While not as breathtaking as Retem's in my opinion, it's still great nonetheless, especially at night. The only thing that could make this view better would be a nice steamed ham. All of these fantastic visuals come together to complete the most striking region yet. Couple that with a very atmospheric soundtrack, and you set a standard that is expected to be met and surpassed going forward. In my opinion, it's going to be very hard to top Kavaris. At least, it's overworld anyway. But if you asked me which new region I prefer, I would answer Retem, and there are several reasons for this. To start, I'm not a fan of Kavaris' vertically focused level design. This is to be expected of a mountainous region, but why I don't like climbing mountains in NGS should be obvious to you if you've played the game before. It's unnecessarily difficult at times, annoying, and interrupts the main gameplay loop. Even when I'm in combat areas, I find myself spending more time doing parkour than actually fighting. And while the cocoons did train me in the art of holding down the jump button, they didn't train me to fight boredom. Besides that, my character tends to get stuck on things all the time in Kavaris. This is definitely because of the extreme vertical nature of the map. There's just no way they could check every single spot to make sure you wouldn't get stuck. As for navigating Kavaris, it's actually very difficult without referencing your map every 30 seconds. Everything pretty much looks the same. Aelio's landscape may have been boring, but at least you could say you knew where you were at all times. Each part of the region had its own unique aesthetic, and Central City was the heart of it all, clearly visible at all times and located in the middle of the overworld. Now when it comes to Retem, the same could be said about Retem City. While it's not in the exact center of the region, it's easily visible, and for the most part, the region is filled with plenty of landmarks to gauge where you were. In Kavaris, it's the opposite. You can't use the base camp as a reference point like the other regions. Aside from 2 or 3 locations in particular, the entire map just blends together. I honestly forgot what most of it looks like. I wish I was kidding when I say this, but when I'm in Kavaris, I think I spend more time looking at the map than actually playing. So many Ryuker devices are close together, some lower than others on like the same mountain. It's just really weird, and it makes it hard to determine what leads to where. The only locations I vividly remember are the Bulgaria ruins, Lost Central, and this place, but only because it's close to a region mag. I didn't even know I was missing a Ryuker device until I was 3 weeks into Kavaris, and when I found out, it only helped solidify my opinion that everything looks the same, because if I didn't get any closer to it, I would have skipped over it entirely. I would like to skip over this section if I could, but I can't because it's regarding the story. To recap, we're still trying to improve the Central City canon to fight Dark Falls again. The only one that could help us at this point is one of Crawford's friends named Ilma, who lives in the Kavaris region. Conveniently, he's gone missing, so you can guess what happens next. We're sent on a search and rescue mission to find Ilma. When we get there, we meet his siblings, who have already started looking for him. After a creepy moment with Mary, with intimidating and dark music playing in the background, foreshadowing something in the future, almost like she wanted Ilma to get lost, we are finally given the okay to join them on the search. Not that we actually needed their permission anyway. Minor spoiler alert, you find Ilma. That should have been, obvious. And after that, you uncover some more secrets regarding shit no one cares about. Oh, and Manon yet again shows off. She's so fucking annoying. This chapter had a few heartfelt moments, and to my surprise, had character development that wasn't exclusively done through verbal means. The finale was action-packed and showcased how well the siblings worked together, and this played a role in letting the player learn more about them without someone actually saying anything. Overall, the siblings' interactions with each other feel natural, and while PSO2 is the epitome of an anime game, and the finale was a bit over the top, most of the story, aside from that, felt grounded in reality. When it comes to the characters, I like them more than the ones in Retem. They are a bit one-dimensional, but they each have their own personality, and their voice actors convincingly portray their expected demeanor. And, I mean, at this point, any voice acting is better than Nadara's, let's be real here. The one thing I didn't like about them, however, was how their color scheme matched their personality. At a glance, you can guess how they'll act. For example, the hot-headed sibling is all red, and the cool and collected one is blue. The voice of reason is green, who also happens to be the only one with common sense. Ilma is yellow because technology, electricity, I don't know. And Mary is pink because gender stereotypes, I guess. I find this character design trope very boring. I don't like being able to guess someone's personality the second I see them, because for once I'd like to be wrong when it comes to assuming things about other people. Despite my complaints about the characters and the chapter itself feeling shorter than Retem's, it was okay. Not amazing, but okay. Honestly, I was expecting much worse. After Retem, I thought I would just be flat out disappointed, but I wasn't, so yeah, good job. Now, what about the rest of the content added with this update? Does it leave me disappointed? Well, yes and no. Kavaris suffers from the same issue that Retem does. The enemies you find here are a mix between those unique to the region and reused dolls. And like in Retem, the dolls are the main focus. This time around though, instead of just being colored brown, they're colored purple, kind of. Some of them freeze you too, because what other kind of status ailment would be introduced in a snow region? Very clever, Sega. Very clever. Now on top of having to stomach these liquid-cooled monstrosities, I get to experience the joy of being affected by crowd control. How lovely. Just what I wanted. These fuckers give me flashbacks to 2016, when I was a retard that played Overwatch every day. Nowadays though, I'm just a retard that plays this. Wait a second. How the fuck are the dolls moving around in negative 15-degree weather if they're filled with liquid? Don't answer that, it was rhetorical, I don't really care. I hate dolls, and I hate fighting the ones that can freeze you. I'm calling it now. In the next region, instead of getting turned into a popsicle, the dolls are gonna have flamethrowers that turn you into a hot dog. Mark my words, it'll happen, and if it doesn't, someone on Reddit is going to cry about it and say that I was spreading misinformation. But anyway, I said it once and I'll say it again. It doesn't matter what region you're in. It doesn't matter how varied the enemy attacks are. It doesn't even matter if the dolls were given rice hats. Fighting dolls makes you feel like you're still in Alio. We need variety. The dolls have to go. And so does the robot in the Beluga Ruins, or whatever the fuck it's called. At first, I didn't have a problem with it, unlike the Lab Ruins robot, which made that stupid fucking woo sound every 3 seconds. After running around with this one for a while, I realized that I could barely see my character. In fact, the only time I could really see my character well is if I'm using the over-shoulder view or if a boss monster is around. Is this something Sega intentionally does? Do they go out of their way to make the robot helpers as annoying as possible? I actually avoid the ruins now because of this thing. That's how much it bothers me. And it's not like I can keep it from following me either, because even if someone else kills it, it still pops up on my screen. Going over the bosses briefly, generally speaking they are fun and engaging. They do blend into the surroundings more than I'd like, which really does annoy me, like I mentioned earlier in the video, but aside from that I don't really have any complaints about them. Oh, and many of them make use of the new throwing mechanic. When it comes to the new cocoons, they are more or less the same. You still have your parkour missions, your combat missions, and new to the region, hoverboarding missions, which is yet another thing I'll elaborate on soon, because trust me, we need to talk about them. As for the urgent quests, we're given 2 of them exclusive to Kavaris. One has you fight a crocodilus, the one that shoves their balls in your face and then you shove them back in his, and the other is Am's Kavaris, my personal favorite. Alongside these 2 came an additional difficulty setting for the Dark Vault's urgent quest back in Alio. At the time of writing the script, these are the current endgame urgent quests, and they drop some of the best weapons and augments available, albeit at a extremely low drop rate. Most people that play them though, do so in hopes of obtaining a weapon from the Rock series, which are required to create an even stronger weapon later on. The Rock series came under some controversy upon their release. When they're used to create a Kaisar weapon, any augment applied to them won't transfer over. This led to a lot of money being wasted on expensive augments that just disappeared. This was a real kick in the dick to the players that spent hours and hours trying to get the required materials to create the weapon. For most people, Blizzardium was the most difficult to obtain. There were a few ways to get them, but the most reliable method involved exploiting one of the combat sector trials. People would hop from room to room all day, trying to get the hoverboard trial to occur, and if it was, they'd relay the information to other people and then purposely not finish it until they broke all the yellow boxes that spawned, just so they can get a few pieces of Blizzardium, if they were even that lucky. That's how desperate they were for this shit. Later down the line, Sega added more ways to get Blizzardium, but I still think it's funny how most of the player base had to exploit the system just to progress in a reasonable amount of time. I think the players that did this were banned for it too. Still to this day, I have yet to obtain my first Kaiser weapon, but it's not because I don't have enough Blizzardium. It's because I can't be bothered to farm the icicle cubes. That shit just takes way too long. I guess now would be a good time as ever to go over the Ancients, which are located in a very specific area that needs you to have ice resistance or frozen resistance or whatever the fuck they call it. Because if you don't, you're gonna get hurt every few seconds while you're in there. But that's not the annoying part. The annoying part about farming Ancients is that they take way too fucking long to kill. And because of this, I am not going to farm them. I participated in one fight and I never want to bother with it again. That alone should say enough. I'm okay with my Evolo whatever weapons. I don't need Kaisers. I won't subject myself to the tediousness of grinding for it. And you want to know why? Because I value my time, and the Kaiser weapons are going to be outclassed soon anyway, so what the fuck does it matter? Look, you can say this is a skill issue all you want. The reality is, I'm just not stupid enough to waste my time on this, especially when the monsters you fight are the exact same ones in the rest of the overworld. Literally nothing is enticing me to farm icicle cubes. But listen, if you're okay with all this rehashed content, more power to you. You're the reason why the game is in such a shitty state it's in. Kavaris introduced 2 new activities, hoverboarding and field races. I'll go over the field races first because it should be quick. They're basically time trials. The goal of them is to reach all the waypoints as quickly as possible. You're scored on how long it takes you to get there and how many balls you collect along the way. Yeah, they're balls. They're photon balls. Whatever. They're balls, okay? Balls, balls, balls. Funny balls joke. Laugh. Field races are dead content. Once you finish them, you have no reason to go through them a second time unless you're into speedrunning or something. But if you are, there are plenty of other games you should be speedrunning instead of NGS. The field races support multiplayer, but I've yet to find anyone else doing them. No one fucking cares about them, or remembers they exist, since they aren't even added to the world map to begin with. Even Sega gives no fucks about them, because if they did, they would have fixed a timer glitch already. An old acquaintance of mine from my Paladins days brought this to my attention. The timer doesn't even start at 0 seconds, which kind of invalidates the entire point of being timed to begin with, but what do we know? You know, we're not game developers. Now onto hoverboarding. These are used for several reasons. They streamline the process of collecting materials in Kavaris, let you one-shot weaker enemies, and as mentioned prior, are used to farm Blizzardium. They're also used for 2 of the new field trials. I explained one of them earlier, but the other one is a real pain in the ass. Whenever it pops up, I willingly sit it out because I know the other players will slave away and finish it for me. The trial I'm referring to is the one where you chase the ship. There's no good reason for this to exist. It tasks you with knocking the cargo containers off the ship. To do this, you need to time your jumps off these conveniently placed ramps, except they're not actually conveniently placed, and after jumping off them, you have very little air control. You also move faster than the ship, and spend more time waiting for it to pass than actually chasing it. When you do think you're about to land a hit on the container, most of the time the jump mechanic bugs out. This trial is overall a very frustrating experience, and I truly believe the game would be better off without it. On surface level, it may look simple, but trust me, it's not. Looks are deceiving. You'll regret taking part in it within seconds, and you'll want to kill yourself immediately if you happen to be the only one in the combat sector having to do this. I do like the concept of utilizing new mechanics in trials instead of relying on just combat, but the execution behind this one in particular fails big time. It mostly has to do with the hoverboard itself though. I thought they would be fun to use since movement in NGS feels very fluid and streamlined, but that's not the case at all here. There's just so much wrong with them. The most blatant would be the controls. If you've used these before, I don't think I need to explain myself, but for those of you who haven't used these, let me tell you, these have got to be some of the worst vehicle controls ever designed, and this is coming from someone who was able to master GTA 4's driving mechanics. Whoever thought the mouse button should be used to brake should have to eat broken glass covered in mercury. Also, why the hell does the board move on its own? Do you know how annoying it is to have to constantly be holding down the mouse button to brake and turn around and stay still? Your character doesn't auto-run by default, so I don't see why the board should move on its own either. After wrestling with the controls for a while, you're able to get the hang of it, but A turd covered in gold is still a turd. I didn't even mention the camera. It zooms in on your character so much, it makes it really hard to see what's going on sometimes. I remember coming across a boss monster in West Kavaris while using one, and I was very surprised at how much easier it was to use with a wider camera angle. This, in my opinion, is how it should be by default. It just feels so much easier to use this way. I really can't get over how much I hate these. No joke, I'd rather push a broken shopping cart through a supermarket than deal with this. I don't know what it is about Japanese game developers and their terrible, terrible vehicle controls. It's just so weird because in PSO2, the AIS units controlled fine, so I don't know what the fuck happened here. Now, if you thought I was done complaining about these fucking things, you're wrong. We still need to talk about how the board's normal traveling speed is slower than dashing. Yes, there's a speed boost, but it doesn't last very long. If you wanted to use the boost again, you'd have to wait for it to regenerate, kill an enemy, or jump off your board and then find another. And I think the worst part about the speed boost is that it doesn't even keep your momentum afterwards. After it's over, you kind of awkwardly just go back to your normal speed. If something like this happened in real life, you'd be thrown off headfirst into the snow and probably suffer a broken bone or two. It just doesn't feel right. And something else that bothered me is that the boards don't take gravity into account. What I mean by this is they go up and down a mountain at the same speed. Again, it just feels weird. Aside from completing the trials that require the hoverboard and farming Blizzardium, there's really no reason why you'd want to use these. And even though they're pretty much in every part of the region, you can't keep them as you enter another zone. Oh, and I didn't even mention that these things have a time limit either. So yeah, I hope you like having to find a new one every 60 seconds. I think the only talking points left deal with the quality of life stuff. These include replayable story quests, an improved color system for the 5 people that still play casts, God help you, and an auto-selling feature that clears up inventory space, which had come under controversy when it was released. In other MMOs, auto-selling would be a basic feature, available to all, but Sega handles things a little differently. They make you pay for basic, industry-standard MMO functions like trading and player shops, and apparently auto-selling too. If you were exclusively free-to-play, you'd have to shovel out 500 star gems every 30 days just to use the damn thing. But if you were paying for premium, you'd get this for quote-unquote free. Premium costs real money, and if you can't afford to pay for auto-sell that way, you actually end up spending more when you buy it with star gems. 500 star gems right now is roughly the equivalent of $19 US before tax. Premium, which again includes the autosell feature, only costs $13. So on top of the feature being a subscription-based microtransaction, it's an expensive one to boot if you are exclusively free-to-play. As for why this feature was added, well, it's because many people were complaining that their inventories were being filled with garbage. The inventory bloat got so bad that people would actually spend more time managing their drops than actually playing the game. This mostly occurred in Alien Retem, where 3-star items and below would be received. In Kavaris, Sega removed the 3-star items and compensated players with an increased amount of meseta given after each kill. And while this gesture was done in good nature, it lessened the overall value of the autosell feature since most of the players that bought it were of high level anyway. I don't want to stay on this topic any longer, but before moving on, I will say this. The only reason why this extremely predatory microtransaction exists is because of the terrible auto-looting system. Despite its shortcomings, overall I think the Kavaris update was decent. A step in the right direction, if you will. It brought more to the table than Retem did, that's for sure, and for better or worse, the content was memorable. And that to me is crucial right now, because memorable and meaningful content is something the game doesn't have enough of, and that is one of its biggest flaws, if that hasn't been made abundantly clear already. As for the community's thoughts, well, it was Alio but on ice, and for most people, that was enough. Well, we've made it to July. Left off on a high note there, and this month should be the same. After all, it's the 10th anniversary of PSO2. A grandiose occasion, which should be filled with celebratory activities commemorating the decade of disappointment players all over the world have experienced. I'm only kidding. Or am I? Regardless of how you felt over the last 10 years, either playing on the Japanese servers or on the global servers since day one, I think we can all agree that Sega deserves a round of applause for not having the game collapse in on itself. Congratulations, Sega. So, what did you plan for, without question, your most important event to date? Are you releasing a new boss monster, another region, maybe highly requested features that have yet to make their return, free 3-day player shop passes to all, or better yet, permanent market access to everyone regardless of premium status? Oh, and what about the base game? Are you going to do something about that too, since that's what's carried you this far? No? You're not doing any of that? Well, What are you doing for the 10th anniversary? Oh no. That's right, instead of making the event one to remember, instead of doing the right thing and making an attempt to fix things, they hang up some lights, staple some PNGs to the forehead of enemies, and release a limited time event that lets you farm seasonal points. You know, as good as the rewards are in the shop this time around, I'm still very disappointed. I just can't get over the fact that they've been reusing the same event every other month for well over a year now. I thought maybe, just maybe, the 10th anniversary would bring something new. But no, that's wishful thinking. Why would they put effort into the 10th anniversary event? Like, yeah, they gave us access to really awesome weapons and a bunch of Blizzardium and threw scratch tickets at us like they were nothing, but that isn't enough to keep your player base from leaving. Sega, we need content. What good are free weapons if there's nothing interesting to use them on? What good is Blizzardium if most of the player base can't even stomach farming ancients? What good are scratch tickets if they give us shit we've already had before from base PSO2? Look, I'm really trying to not seem ungrateful here, but if you've played the game for a while, you can see why I'd be a little pissed off. These events really suck, man. It's always the same shit. And before anyone says anything, I know, base PSO2 kind of did the same thing by changing the ship's lobby appearance and having limited time quests, but at least the decorations were more than lights we can't interact with. At least they had purpose. At least they didn't make us fight dolls all the fucking time. The way they've treated this game is outright disgusting. They've sucked all the soul out of it in every possible way. Everything is so sterile, so boring, so safe. Why are the events so trash? Why do we keep fighting the same fucking generic alien design everywhere? Give me something new. Just give me back base PSO2. That's all I want. Sorry about that, I kinda went off the deep end. Then again, you would too if you had to make a several hour long video about this game. Let's just try to forget the anniversary event for now, and move into August. Hopefully, it's not that bad. In August, Sega released the Waker class, which was heavily inspired by the Summoner in base PSO2. The other content shuffled in with this update includes new side stories that fleshed out a few more characters, a mining rig quest for Kavaris, a new type of Trania like the Geometric Labyrinth, an additional unnecessary battle power boosting system, NPCs that assist you in combat sectors, and of course, new scratch tickets, featuring VTubers, two of which nobody's ever heard of. The Waker class is unlike any other. Instead of dealing the damage yourself, you summon multiple stands to do your bidding. That's right, I said it, they're stands. We all know that if I called them familiars, the weebs watching would throw a shit fit, so there, that's your JoJo reference for today. You can clap now. As I was saying, I personally don't like this class very much. It kind of puts me to sleep, which is ironic seeing as the class is called Waker. I thought if anything, it wouldn't be boring, but I guess not. Looks are very deceiving. The stands you use offer a mix between short and long-ranged attacks. If I didn't make myself clear already, I don't like flashy animations, which is why I mostly play in low detail. I also don't like the animations because some of them look like you aren't actually hitting anything. I'm going to be honest, I didn't get to play this class very much because I did want to finish this video on time. So maybe my opinion of it will change in the future. But as of right now, I think it sucks. But if you like it, more power to you. Somebody has to like the bad classes. I'm only kidding, relax, don't get your panties in a bunch. The new side stories are actually my favorite addition with this update. They flesh out the characters quite a bit and fill in some gaps with the game's lore. They also hint at things to come. So, if you're even so much as slightly interested in the game's story, you should sit through them. There are a handful, and they're pretty short, about only 2 or 3 minutes in length each. I really wish these came out sooner. I think if they did, people wouldn't have ragged on the story so much. And truthfully, neither would I. After going through these, I started to actually like the characters a bit more, especially Dozer. And I have to apologize to Crawford. He's not as evil as I thought. You know, it's funny. Up until this point, I thought that all of the mining rig quests were trash. And for the most part, they are. But this one in particular stands out to me. Why? Because there's actually unique enemies in it, and it's not just the boss monster. Can't believe I'm about to say this, but I actually like this mining rig quest. Yeah. Something must be wrong with me. The new Trania lets you farm class EX cubes that are used for a few things, including the new add-on skill system, which I cover next. The goal of this activity is to break all the targets using the balls that drop from fallen enemies. Unlike the geometric labyrinth, I completed this, but only because at this point I desperately needed something new to do, and as you would expect, I hate it. I'm so fucking sick of these things, man. Really, they need to give us actual dungeons. I know NGS is heavily inspired by Breath of the Wild, but this is ridiculous. No dungeons in that game, and no dungeons in this one either. And no, I don't consider those 4 beasts actually dungeons. There were no enemies in it, they all looked the same, they all used the same mechanics. That shit was stupid and boring. Just like the Trania, they aren't fun, and never will be, as long as they all look the same and are filled with random bullshit you can find outside. Going off topic for a moment, since I couldn't really find a better place to put this, why the fuck do they use cocoons and Trania interchangeably? Can they not decide on what to call them? This isn't the only time it's happened either. They do this with the enemies too. Are they dread enemies or veterans? Gigantics or malevolence? It's just so confusing. Am I the only one that finds this annoying? The add-on skill system introduced with this update lets you apply permanent stat boosts to your character, so long as you have the necessary materials, those being Class EX cubes. The effects you can receive from these boosts vary greatly, but if you roll the right ones, you can strengthen your character quite a bit. The only downside I see to this system being in place is it's yet another mechanic that players need to learn if they want to boost their battle power. Wait a second, no, I lied. I have another issue with these. The boosts you get are entirely based on RNG, which is bullshit. Like I said much earlier in the video, in June or July, I can't remember which, Sega added a much needed feature, which is Combat Sector NPC party members. That's a mouthful. And also a lie, they weren't introduced in June or July, but actually in August. So, sorry about that. I misrepresented when they were added. But I'm not going back to edit that part, because fuck that, I'm almost done with the video. I need to move on with my life. These bots fill up the open player slots in your room, and they leave as real people join. These bots make training in lower level areas possible, since they can take aggro and distract other enemies. Having the bots available when I started playing again would have made my time in Retem much more enjoyable. But that's in the past now. Even at higher levels, they're okay. And really, I appreciate their inclusion because running around in a room by yourself gets very boring and lonely. Expect to see them a lot. There aren't enough players left to actually train with most of the time, so don't be surprised if these bots become your best friends. Before jumping into September, I think it's worth mentioning that on August 31st, PlayStation 4 and 5 owners outside of Japan were finally able to get their hands on NGS, which included the base game as well. The great influx of new players was met by the community with much rejoice. So much so that the beginner blocks that were meant for the Sony players were completely flooded with veterans trying to show off their fake breasts and original characters. This resulted in very few PS4 players being able to join anything but the exclusive PS4 servers. At least on my ship anyway. Oh, and how could we forget about the game's rebranding that came with the Sony release, which was met with a lot of flack from the community, and for good reason. This doesn't convey Phantasy Star at all. The characters shown in no way represent what NGS is about. They're all using guns too. Where are the swords? The partisans? The katanas? Why the fuck does it look like some uninspired Chinese bootleg battle royale game cover? The color scheme is really off-putting too. It isn't even used in the game anywhere. When I see these colors with these characters, the first thing that pops into my head is Cyberpunk 2077, not Phantasy Star. I wonder if someone at Sega was tipped off about how popular Cyberpunk would be after the anime came out. I just can't think of any other reason why they rebrand the game to look like this, because right now it's riding off of Cyberpunk's success. It's a misleading advertisement. People download this and they think they're gonna get something like Cyberpunk. I seriously want to know why this was approved at all. Yes, it's eye-catching, but that's all it is. It's not eye-catching for a good reason. This doesn't look good at all. It looks like it was made by some graphic design intern. This is disgusting. Get this out of my sight. Oh, what? You wanted me to talk about the Moon Viewing Festival? And about how it was just like any other event? How it added a limited time weapon set that will be outclassed in a few months? And how Sega added Blizzardium to the event shop because people were begging for an easier way to obtain it? And how we had to kill enemies with seasonal icons stapled to their forehead? And how the limited time quest was boring as shit and not worth doing? Well, guess what? I'm not. I'm not talking about any of that. You're not missing out on anything. There are better things to talk about anyway, like hoverboard racing. Yeah! It's exactly what you'd expect. That certainly was a lot to go through. Hopefully it gave you an idea of how far the game has come. If you feel that it hasn't progressed that much, you're not alone. Most of the player base still feels that the game, over a year later, could be so much more. So the question now is, since we're in October, what can we expect moving forward? Well, this month they're increasing the level cap to 65, adding higher ranked sectors to the combat areas, giving another character a short story, a new trainia that I probably won't play, triggers for all the urgent quests, finally, and a few other things. And adding a Melty Blood collaboration scratch ticket. Come November, we're supposed to get a limited time quest, more cocoon modifiers, and a crossover with an anime called Overload. In December, things start heating up. That wasn't meant to be a pun. December is literally when the next big update happens. That's when we get to run around Stia or Staya. It doesn't really matter. As for me, I'm probably just gonna call it Volcalio, because that's what it looks like based on the trailers. What comes after that is anyone's guess. They still haven't revealed a new roadmap, and that's not a good thing. How do I feel about the game's future? Truthfully, I would love nothing more than to see it thrive, but I don't think this will happen if the new region turns out to be a dud. If Volcalio doesn't meet and surpass player expectations and ends up being, well, just Volcalio, I can only see one thing happening. The player base drops even lower than before. In this scenario, realistically, Sega only has two options. 1. Reevaluate everything they've done so far and pull a Realm Reborn, which is unlikely to ever happen, but nice to pray for. Or 2. They pull the plug. Not right away, of course, that'd be stupid, but in due time. There's just no way they can justify keeping the servers online if the player base isn't there to support them. The whales can only spend so much on breast implants and bikinis before they grow tired of standing around Central City all day flirting with each other. Or fucking each other, since the porn animation mods they install let them do just that. Yeah, you didn't mishear me. A good portion of the player base only plays because they get to install sex animations where they get to pretend to fuck each other in plain sight, but unless you install the right mods, you won't see this happening. But that's besides the point. I think I speak for everyone when I say that the game would benefit from being shoved back in the oven for a while. It's not like base PSO2 would be affected anyway. In fact, if they did do this, the base game would probably see more play. Shutting down NGS to rework every aspect of it would cost them potentially millions upon millions, but given its current status and reputation, I think it's necessary. A portion of Sega's $1 billion investment this year could be spent on improving NGS instead of putting out garbage like Hyenas, which is destined to fail, or whatever the fuck else they're coming out with, like Sonic Frontiers, which is clearly using the NGS engine. I mean, look at the environment, the structures, the enemies, even Sonic's moveset, which is basically the bouncer class using jet boots. This is literally the content that's missing from NGS. Even the girl, whatever her name is clearly the reincarnation of Darkfall's Gemini, repurposed as a Sonic character. When Frontiers was revealed, some people started trolling everybody by using the Sonic costume in NGS and running around in Aelio's open field. And people were fooled by this. That's how similar they look. I have a theory as to why NGS is such a fucking minefield. It's because Sega reassigned the game developers to work on Sonic Frontiers. I mean, think about it. It makes sense. Sega wants Sonic to do well. It's his first big game in years, and reassigning people to another project that uses the same engine is cheaper than hiring and training new employees. So maybe after the Sonic game comes out, we'll see things pick up with NGS a bit. But I'm not holding my breath on that, and neither should you. This is Sega we're talking about after all. The same people that thought killing off the base game after a year was a good idea. Sega needs to admit that the game is garbage before they can make any further progress. But they'll never do that because, like I mentioned in the last video, Japanese people are very stubborn. It doesn't matter how fluid the controls are, or how great the combat feels, or how extensive the character creator is. If what's built upon NGS's solid foundation isn't engaging or rewarding, why bother playing at all? To engage in erotic roleplay, like some degenerate porn-addicted Coomer? You could do that in literally any other game. Seriously, why would anyone with a sound mind spend hours upon hours grinding away on the same 10 enemies with slightly different attacks and appearances depending on what region they're in? Why would anyone want to participate in urgent quests if the bosses you fight are running around in the overworld and the drops you get are garbage? Why would anyone log in for a limited time event if it's a carbon copy of all the previous ones? Why would anyone bother doing the cocoons or trainia or whatever the fuck they want to call them if they give shit tier rewards and reuse assets? NGS has 3 issues. The main issue is it lacks meaningful content. The other issues are, it doesn't reward the player well enough, and it's an open world game. The best items have the lowest drop rates, which is to be expected, but most of the other stuff you do receive can only be sold for the bare minimum. And unless you pay for premium or use a rare personal shop pass, the item prices are dictated by Sega. And on second thought, the personal shop items are dictated by Sega as well, since they get to set the minimum price for everything. The reward in NGS for doing well is money, which lets you buy the things you want. And if most of the player base can't get enough money, they aren't going to feel rewarded, which in turn makes them play something else that feels more fulfilling. A short-term fix for this, in my opinion, would be to give everyone access to the player shop, even if it's just 1 or 2 slots, because giving players access to the shop will let them reach their personal goals faster, because that's mostly what NGS encourages. The game encourages you to do what you want, to achieve your personal goals. Giving players access to the shop will give them something to work for. It'll motivate them and let them reward themselves for their efforts, and most importantly, it'll do this in a reasonable amount of time. Yes, real-world trading will benefit from giving everyone a slot or 2, but the actual players will benefit even more. To combat real-world trading, they could always put restrictions in place, like not letting new accounts use the shop for a few days, or forcing them to play until they reach certain quests, because locking it behind a level requirement is out of the question. The game pushes millions of experience up your ass before you even reach Retem. When it comes to the open world, in my opinion, it's doing more harm than good. All it's done so far is increase the time it takes to develop new content, force the developers to reuse assets, and throw everything they have into cocoons, and segregate the players based on their story progression. All these gimmicks like snowboarding and floating, we could do without them, because they don't really add much value to begin with. At best, they're time wasters. The game's main focus after fashion, of course, was always combat, so to put effort into anything else at this point seems like a waste, especially when the combat department is lacking. We have a bunch of classes that mostly play the same. They usually revolve around countering enemies and spamming AoE abilities, and we've been using the same photon arts for over a year now. The only thing that's really changed with combat is how high our damage numbers go up, and to most players, min-maxing their equipment isn't important. What is to them, however, is variety in enemies, in classes, in skills, in attacks. The open world approach they took is forcing the developers to be very lazy with the content they release, and this plays a huge role in why the game lacks meaningful content. What Sega needs to do is return to PSO's roots. They need to go back to randomized dungeons with quests that are accepted from an in-game lobby. We need to go back to space, not run around the same fucking planet for over a year playing Scooby-Doo, trying to figure out the mystery, listening to Velma talk her head off. We need to become the space police again, not some side character that suffers from amnesia. We need to go back to PSO's roots. The formula they had worked very well, because if it didn't, the game wouldn't have lasted 10 years. And they decided to throw away a proven formula because someone on the development team played Breath of the Wild one time. I truly believe that Breath of the Wild has done irreparable damage to the gaming industry as a whole, and nobody else sees this. But this video isn't the time or place to elaborate on why I feel this way. Maybe someday I'll make a video explaining why. I've mentioned this for years now, but I don't know when that's gonna come out. That's a project for another time. And honestly, this one has gone on long enough. I think that's all I want to say for now. I know I didn't go over a lot of things, like how the game is still missing features like the casino and buster quests, and I know for a fact that I missed a few things like talking about Retem and Kavaris' Battle Dia quests, but at this point, I'm burnt out. Just like the game, the script for this video was all over the place until I finalized it, and honestly, I'm glad it's fucking over. This took 4 months to complete. I've used all of my free time working on this. I want to do something else now, if you don't mind. My closing thoughts are this. Sega needs to figure out what they want the game to be. Do they want it to be open world or dungeon based? Do they want it to be a Barbie dress-up simulator or a combat-focused game? Do they want to call the tougher enemies dread enemies or veterans? Are they cocoons or trainia? They need to decide on one path and stick with it, because right now it feels like several people are directing the game and they're making it go in different directions. It feels like they're fighting with each other over how it should move forward. Next year I expect things to get crazy because they're going to try a lot of new things just to see if the player base sticks around. As for how long I think the game will last, maybe another year or so. Now when it comes to the base game, I think what they should do is do what Jagex did with with RuneScape. Re-release base PSO2 and build upon it. Create episode 7, because clearly a lot of people prefer the old lobby with instanced-based missions over whatever NGS is trying to do. There's no other game right now in the market that can scratch the base PSO2 itch. So if Sega was smart, they'd take this opportunity to solidify their presence in that niche before someone else does and ends up doing it better. Would I recommend playing NGS today? Yeah, but only as a side game. There's just not enough content right now to justify spending most of your time on it. Am I going to continue playing NGS? Well, I'll probably stick around for Valkaleo, but after that, who knows? My expectations for the new region are very low, and if it ends up feeling more or less like Kavaris or Retem, I think I'm just gonna call it quits. And I think the most important question we need to ask ourselves now is NGS still a disaster? In my opinion, not as much. Make of that what you will. Thank you for joining me on this lengthy journey. I applaud you for listening to me ramble on for several hours. Not many people can do it. If you've enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate it if you left a like and a comment. And if you feel this video resonated with you in any way, please share it with your friends, but not your family, because I don't think you want them to know you play NGS. I have no idea when I'll be able to come out with another video. I'm probably going to take another break for a long time. But if you think the next video is worth waiting for, by all means, please subscribe. I'm about to hit 50,000 subscribers, so if you could help me reach that goal, I would really appreciate it. Anyway, thanks again for watching the video. I'll see you next time.